If there is one thing I learned in my final year on this earth, it is this. Family is not a title you inherit, but a choice you make every single day. My children, Mark and Sarah, had made their choice. And on that gray Tuesday afternoon, in a room that smelled of old leather and consequence, they were about to learn the price of it. They had been waiting for this day for months, the day my last will and testament would be read. They saw it not as the final chapter of my life, but as the first chapter of theirs, their inheritance, the reward they believed they were owed for simply existing. The lawyer, Mr. Davies, a man who had known me for 30 years, looked at them over the rim of his glasses, his expression unreadable. He read through the minor bequests, a small donation to the local library, a piece of jewelry for a cousin. Mark was tapping his foot impatiently. Sarah was glancing at her watch. Finally, Mr. Davies reached the main clause. And as for the remainder of my estate, he read, his voice clear and steady, echoing my own written words, valued at approximately $7 million, including my primary residence, all stock portfolios, and liquid assets. He paused, letting the weight of the number hang in the air. Mark leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with greed. Sarah held her breath. This was it. I bequeath, in its entirety, to Mr. Samuel Jones. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark and Sarah just stared at him, their faces a comical mask of disbelief. What? Mark finally choked out. Who? Who the hell is Samuel Jones? Mr. Davies looked up from the will, his face a mask of cold, professional neutrality. According to the addendum written in your mother's own hand, he said, picking up a second piece of paper, Mr. Jones was, and I quote, the man who drove your mother to her final chemotherapy appointment. Before the illness, my life was a quiet, contented symphony of my own making. After my dear husband David passed away 5 years prior, I had found a new rhythm. I was not a wealthy woman in the way the world measures it, no mansions, no empires. I was a retired pediatric nurse, and my wealth was of a different kind. It was in the paid-off mortgage of my beautiful 2-story home, a home filled with the laughter ghosts of my children growing up. It was in my sprawling garden, a chaotic riot of roses and tomatoes that was my pride and joy. And it was in the comfortable nest egg David and I had diligently saved, enough to ensure I would never be a burden on anyone. I was proud of my independence. I was Ellie, the woman who still climbed her own ladder to clean the gutters, who baked bread for the entire neighborhood, who could fix a leaky faucet with a wrench and a stubborn determination. My life was full. Full of my book club, my gardening society, my volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. But the true center of my universe, the sun my little world orbited around, was my children. Mark, my son, was a financial broker in the city. He was driven, ambitious, always chasing the next big deal. He lived in a sleek, modern apartment with his wife, and they were always busy, their lives a whirlwind of business trips and networking events. He didn't call as often as I would have liked, but when he did, his voice was full of a brisk, efficient affection. I was proud of his success, a success I attributed to the work ethic David and I had tried to instill in him. Sarah, my daughter, was a whirlwind of a different kind. A suburban mother of 2, her life was a chaotic ballet of soccer practices, school plays, and PTA meetings. She was constantly stressed, perpetually late, and her phone conversations with me were often a breathless monologue about the trials of modern motherhood. She was a good mother, devoted to her children, and I admired her for it, even if I secretly wished she would find a moment of peace for herself. They were good children, busy, self-absorbed, as adult children often are, but I never doubted their love. I was their anchor, their constant, the quiet port they could always return to. Or so I believed. The first sign that something was wrong was a weariness that settled deep into my bones, a fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. I dismissed it as age. You're 65, Eleanor, I told myself. You're not a spring chicken anymore. Then came the persistent cough and a strange, dull ache in my back. I ignored it for weeks, because that's what mothers do. We are so used to taking care of others that we often forget to listen to the whispers of our own bodies. It was my best friend Clara who finally forced my hand. Ellie, you look like a ghost, she said to me over our weekly coffee, her eyes full of a worry I couldn't ignore. Promise me you'll go see Dr. Matthews. To appease her, I made the appointment. I went alone. Why bother the children with what was surely just a touch of bronchitis? I sat in Dr. Matthew's office, the familiar smell of antiseptic in the air, expecting a prescription for antibiotics and a lecture about getting more rest. That is not what I received. Dr. Matthews was a kind man who had been my doctor for 20 years, but on that day, the usual warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, professional sadness. He didn't look at my chart. He looked directly at me. "Ellie," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "The blood work and the x-rays, they've shown us something we need to address immediately. There's a mass on your left lung. It's quite advanced." The words didn't seem to make sense. Mass, lung, advanced. They were just clinical terms, floating in the air, refusing to connect into a coherent personal reality. It was like hearing a weather report for a distant country. I just stared at him. "It's lung cancer, Ellie," he said, finally giving the monster its name. "Stage 4. We need to start an aggressive course of chemotherapy immediately." Cancer. The word landed in the quiet, sterile room with the force of a physical blow. It sucked all the air out of my lungs, all the strength from my body. In that single moment, I was no longer Ellie, the independent, capable woman who could fix her own faucet. I was a patient, a victim, a statistic. A terrifying, profound loneliness washed over me, so cold and vast it felt like drowning. My first thoughts, even then, were of my children. How would I tell them? How would I keep from becoming a burden? I stumbled out of the doctor's office in a daze, the cheerful, sunlit world outside now seeming like a cruel mockery. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, the doctor's words echoing in my head. And then, I did what I had always done when my world was falling apart. I called my children. I reached Sarah first. When I told her, her reaction was everything a mother could hope for. She let out a choked sob. "Oh, Mom. Oh, no. No." The line was filled with her tears, and in a strange way, they were a comfort. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion but firm with resolve. "We're going to fight this. We are. I'll be there. I'll take you to every appointment. We'll get through this together. I promise." Then I called Mark. His reaction was different, but no less reassuring. He was shocked into a rare silence. "Okay," he said finally, his voice low and serious, the usual broker's bravado gone. "Okay, Mom, here's what we're going to do. I'll have my assistant research the top oncologists in the country. We'll get you the best care money can buy. Don't worry about the cost. I'll handle all the appointments, all the scheduling. You just focus on getting better. We've got you. We're a team." I hung up the phone, my own tears finally falling. They were tears not of fear, but of profound relief. I was not alone. My children, my busy, self-absorbed, but ultimately loving children, were rallying around me. They were my army. The fear that had gripped me in the doctor's office began to recede, replaced by a surge of hope. Their promises were a shield, and with them by my side I felt, for the first time since hearing the diagnosis, that I could actually fight this. I believed them. With every fiber of my being, I believed their empty, beautiful, worthless promises. In the first week after the diagnosis, my children were a whirlwind of activity. My kitchen table, usually covered with gardening magazines, was now buried under a mountain of medical brochures and printouts about clinical trials. Mark, true to his word, had put his formidable research skills to use. He had arranged consultations with 2 of the top oncologists in the state. He called me every night with updates, his voice full of the same focused energy he used to describe a rising stock. He was managing my illness like a hostile takeover, and in a strange way, his aggressive competence was a comfort. Sarah, on the other hand, took on the role of the nurturing caregiver. She filled my refrigerator with organic juices and healthy, bland foods she insisted were cancer-fighting. She bought me a soft cashmere blanket and a stack of inspirational books. She would call and read me passages over the phone, her voice filled with a fierce, determined optimism. "We have to stay positive, Mom," she'd say. "A positive attitude is half the battle." They were a perfect team, my son the strategist and my daughter the cheerleader. They were my shield, my army, and for that first week, I felt safe. I felt loved. The terrifying loneliness of the diagnosis had been kept at bay by their constant, reassuring presence. I thought, this is what Family Island. This is what it means to be truly cared for. The first crack appeared on the day of my very first chemotherapy appointment. It was a cold, rainy Monday morning. The day was already gray and foreboding, and a knot of pure, cold fear was tied in the pit of my stomach. This was the day it all became real. The day the poison that was meant to save me would be pumped into my veins. More than anything in the world, I did not want to go alone. Sarah had promised, emphatically, that she would be the one to take me. "I'll be there at 8 a.m. sharp, Mom. We'll face the first battle together." At 7:30, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice was frantic, breathless. "Mom, oh my God, you are not going to believe this. Jason just threw up all over the kitchen floor. He has a raging fever. The school just called. There's a stomach flu going around. I can't possibly leave him. I am so sorry. Can you call Mark?" Her voice was filled with what sounded like genuine maternal panic and guilt. Of course, I understood. Her child was sick. A mother's first duty is to her child. "Don't you worry, sweetheart," I told her, my own voice much calmer than I felt. "You take care of my grandbaby. I'll call your brother." I called Mark. He answered immediately, but his voice was tense. "Mom, I'm just walking into a meeting. What's wrong?" I explained the situation with Sarah and her son. "So, you need me to take you?" he asked, and the silence that followed his question was heavy with a hesitation that was like a physical blow. I could hear the sound of papers shuffling, of hushed voices in the background. "Mom," he finally said, his voice dropping to an apologetic whisper, "this island, this is the final negotiation for the Henderson deal. It's a 9-figure account. I've been working on it for 6 months. I can't walk out now. I can't. I am so sorry. Can you just call a cab? Put it on my account. Get the best car service you can find. I'll make it up to you, I promise." A 9-figure deal. A stomach flu. These were the things that had taken precedence over my first day of war. I stood in my hallway, dressed and ready to go, the phone silent in my hand, and the terrifying loneliness I had felt in the doctor's office came rushing back, a cold, suffocating tide. Their promises, so fierce and bright just a week ago, had proven to be fragile, easily broken by the mundane realities of their own lives. I was a priority, but I was not the priority. But I am a proud woman. I would not beg. I would not guilt them. I took a deep, shuddering breath, straightened my shoulders, and I did what he said. I called a local taxi service. The dispatcher's voice was bored, indifferent. 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. I sat on the chair by my front door, my small bag packed with a book and a water bottle, and I waited. It was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a measure of my own insignificance. When the taxi finally arrived, a dented yellow sedan with a cracked windshield, I felt a fresh wave of humiliation. This was my army. This was my shield. That first session was a blur of antiseptic smells, hushed voices, and the slow, steady drip of the IV. I sat in a large, uncomfortable chair surrounded by other patients, other tired, frightened faces. Some had husbands or wives with them, holding their hands. Some had children, reading to them or just sitting in silent, supportive companionship. And I was alone. I read 3 pages of my book and then gave up, the words just a meaningless jumble on the page. I just stared at the bag of poison slowly draining into my arm, and I tried my best not to cry. The calls came later that day, of course, both of them, filled with effusive, guilt-ridden apologies. Sarah's son was feeling much better. Mark's deal was a spectacular success. "I'm so sorry, Mom," they both said in their own ways. "It will never happen again. The next appointment, I'll be there, I swear." And I, because I was their mother, because I wanted to believe them, because the alternative was too painful to contemplate, I said, "It's okay, my darlings. I understand. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. The first crack in the foundation had appeared, and I knew, with a mother's intuition that is never wrong, that it was only a matter of time before the whole structure came crashing down. The second chemotherapy appointment arrived a week later. As promised, Sarah called the night before, her voice bright and determined. "Tomorrow's the day, Mom. I've cleared my entire schedule. Jason is at his dad's for the weekend. The girls are at a sleepover. It's just you and me. I'll bring snacks. Well, make a day of it." Her enthusiasm was so convincing, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of the hope I thought I had lost. I allowed myself to believe that the first time had been an anomaly, a fluke. The next morning, I was dressed and waiting by 8:30. 9 o'clock came and went. I called her. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A cold, familiar dread began to creep up my spine. At 9:30, just as I was about to call another taxi, a text message finally came through. It was a single, breathless sentence. "So sorry, Mom. Had a massive water pipe burst in the basement. House is flooding. Total chaos. We'll call you later." A burst pipe. It was a perfect excuse. It was dramatic, urgent, and completely unverifiable. I stared at the text, the 3 exclamation points at the end, feeling like a mockery. Was it true? Maybe. But a part of me, the part that had been left waiting by the door once before, knew it didn't matter. The result was the same. I was alone. Again. I called Mark. His response was immediate, but just as predictable. "A flood? Oh God, is she okay?" he asked, his first concern for his sister's domestic drama, not his mother's medical appointment. "Listen, Mom, I'm already halfway to the airport. I have to fly to Chicago for a 2-day conference." It was a last-minute thing. "I'm so sorry. I thought Sarah had it covered. Just grab a cab." "Well, figure this out for next time." A conference. A burst pipe. The excuses were becoming more elaborate, but the message was the same. Their lives, their careers, their homes, their dramas, they would always come first. My battle with cancer was just another item on their long, complicated to-do list, and it was always the first item to be rescheduled. So, once again, I called the local taxi service. "It's Eleanor Richardson," I said, my voice flat. "I need a ride to the oncology center." This time, a different car pulled up to my curb. It was an older model Lincoln Town car, but it was immaculately clean, the black paint polished to a high shine. The man who stepped out of the driver's side was older, perhaps in his early 70s, with kind, crinkling eyes and a gentle smile. He was wearing a simple, clean collared shirt and a driver's cap. He walked over and opened the back door for me with a quiet, old-fashioned courtesy. "Mrs. Richardson?" he asked, his voice a warm, gentle baritone. "My name is Samuel Jones. It will be my pleasure to take you to your appointment." There was something about him, a quiet dignity, a settled calm, that was instantly reassuring. The ride to the hospital was different. He didn't have the radio blasting. He just drove, his hand steady on the wheel. "Is it okay if I ask where we are going at the hospital?" he asked gently. "I only ask because my late wife, Mary, spent a lot of time at the oncology center. I know the best entrance to use, the one without all the stairs." The casual mention of his late wife, the shared unspoken understanding of the word oncology, created an instant, unexpected bond between us. "Yes, Mr. Jones," I said, my voice a little thick. "That's where I'm going." He just nodded, his eyes meeting mine for a moment in the rearview mirror, and in that brief glance, I saw not pity, but a deep, knowing empathy. He understood. When we arrived, he didn't just drop me at the curb. He parked the car, came around, and helped me out. He walked with me to the entrance, his hand lightly on my elbow, a steady, reassuring presence. "How long will you be, ma'am?" he asked. "I don't have another fare for a few hours. I can just wait for you in the coffee shop if you'd like. It's no trouble at all." I was so taken aback by his simple, unprompted kindness that I didn't know what to say. "Oh no, Mr. Jones, I couldn't ask you to do that. It could be 3, maybe 4 hours." He just smiled, his gentle smile. "My wife taught me that the worst part of this journey is the waiting, and the second worst part is facing it alone. I have a good book, The Time Will Fly. You just focus on what you need to do." And he did. When I came out 4 hours later, feeling drained, nauseous, and emotionally battered, he was sitting right where he said he would be, a paperback book in his hands. He stood up the moment he saw me. He didn't ask how it went. He just said, I brought you something." He handed me a warm thermos. It's ginger tea with a little honey. Mary always said it helped with the nausea after her treatments. I took the thermos, my hands closing around its warmth, and for the first time that day, I felt the tight knot of tears in my throat begin to dissolve. It was such a small gesture, a cup of tea from a stranger. But in that moment, it felt like the grandest act of human kindness I had ever experienced. It was a gesture of pure, selfless compassion, offered without obligation or guilt. It was everything I had desperately, silently craved from my own children, and it had come from a man I had met only a few hours earlier. On the ride home, we started to talk. He told me about Mary, about their 50 years together, about the garden she had loved. I told him about my late husband David and our shared love for old movies. We didn't talk about cancer. We didn't talk about our absent families. We just talked. Two lonely souls finding a moment of connection in the quiet, comfortable space of his old Lincoln Town car. When he dropped me at my door, I tried to pay him, but he held up a hand. "No, ma'am," he said. "This one was for Mary, but if you'd like, you can request me specifically for your next appointment. I'd be honored to be your regular driver." A new routine was born that day. A sad, ironic routine. My children's apologies and promises would come via text, brief and increasingly perfunctory. But my real support, my real companion on this terrifying journey, was a kind-hearted taxi driver named Sam. The weekly trips to the oncology center became the new, strange rhythm of my life, and at the center of that rhythm was Sam. He was no longer just a taxi driver. He was my anchor in a sea of uncertainty. He became my chemo companion, a role my own children had so eagerly volunteered for and so easily abandoned. He was always there, 5 minutes early, his old Lincoln polished and waiting. He learned the small things, the details that matter so much when your world is shrinking. He knew I got cold easily after the treatments, so he always had a soft, clean blanket waiting on the back seat. He knew the sterile smell of the hospital nauseated me, so he would place a small sachet of lavender on the dashboard. He learned that I hated the silence of my empty house after a session, so he would offer to stop at the little park by the river on the way home, and we would just sit on a bench for a few minutes, watching the ducks, allowing the normalcy of the world to seep back into me. Our conversations deepened. We moved past the polite talk of our late spouses and began to share the real stories of our lives. He told me about his time in the Army, about the daughter he had who lived in Oregon, about his pride in his grandson who was studying to be a doctor. I told him about my years as a pediatric nurse, about the joy and the heartbreak of working with sick children. I told him about Mark's ambition and Sarah's anxieties. I found myself telling him things I hadn't even admitted to my best friend, Clara. In the anonymous, moving sanctuary of his car, I felt safe enough to be vulnerable. He was the one person who never treated me like a patient. To my children, I had become my diagnosis. Our conversations were always bookended by the same, tired questions. How are you feeling? What did the doctor say? Are you eating enough? They were questions born of guilt, not genuine curiosity. But Sam asked me about the book I was reading. He asked me what I thought about the new mayor. He asked me about my roses. He saw me, Eleanor Richardson, not just the cancer, and that was a gift more precious than any organic juice or cashmere blanket. The contrast between his quiet, consistent kindness and my children's sporadic, guilt-driven gestures became painfully, almost comically clear. One week, Mark, in a fit of remorse after missing another promised visit, had a ridiculously expensive, high-tech air purifier delivered to my house. "It's the best on the market, Mom." His text read, "Kills 99.9% of all germs." The machine was a large, humming, metallic beast that took up a quarter of my living room and made me feel like I was living in a sterile research lab. 2 days later, Sam showed up for my appointment holding a small, potted gardenia. "I remember you said you missed the smell of your garden," he said simply. "The air purifier cost $2,000. The gardenia cost $10. One filled my house with a sterile, impersonal hum. The other filled my soul with a scent of pure, simple joy." Another time, Sarah, after canceling a lunch date at the last minute because her daughter had a minor social crisis at school, had a gourmet meal delivery service send me a week's worth of bland, Pre-packaged immune-boosting meals. The food was tasteless, a collection of steamed vegetables and unseasoned chicken that felt more like a punishment than a comfort. The following Tuesday, Sam picked me up, and on the front seat was a small, worn, plaid thermos. "It's just some homemade chicken noodle soup," he said, almost shyly. "My Mary's recipe. It's the only thing that ever made me feel better when I was sick." That soup was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. It was warm and salty and filled with a love and care that no five-star delivery service could ever replicate. They were trying to solve the problem of me with money. They were throwing expensive, impersonal solutions at their own guilt. They were trying to pay their way out of their obligation. Sam, with his $10 plant and his homemade soup, was simply present. He was offering his time, his attention, his empathy. And in the stark, terrifying landscape of a cancer diagnosis, those are the only currencies that truly matter. My children didn't see it, of course. They were relieved. "That taxi driver, Sam, sounds like a real saint," Sarah said to me on the phone one day. "We are so lucky you found him. It's such a weight off our minds to know you're in good hands." A weight off their minds, that's what I had become. A logistical problem that, to their immense relief, had been solved by a stranger. They weren't jealous of the bond I was forming with him. They were grateful for it. It absolved them. It let them off the hook. I never told them about the little things. I never told them that Sam would sometimes stop at the library for me to pick up a new book, or that he would run into the pharmacy to get my prescriptions so I wouldn't have to wait in line. I never told them that he had started calling me Ellie, at my own insistence. These small acts of kindness felt like a secret treasure, a private world that belonged only to me and him. It was a world they hadn't earned the right to enter. In the quiet moments, I would think about the irony of it all. My own children, to whom I had given everything, my time, my body, my unconditional love, could not find an hour in their busy schedules to sit with me in a hospital. And this kind man, this stranger to whom I owed nothing, was giving me the most valuable thing he possessed, his humanity. And I knew, with a certainty that was growing stronger with each passing week, that a kindness so profound could not go unrewarded. After 3 months of grueling chemotherapy, the date for my first major progress scan loomed on the calendar like a judgment day. It wasn't just another appointment, it was the appointment, the PET scan. A terrifyingly futuristic procedure where they inject you with radioactive sugar and slide you into a loud, claustrophobic tube to see if the cancer cells are still feasting on the sweetness or if the poison has finally starved them into submission. This scan would tell us everything. It would tell us if the months of sickness, of hair loss, of bone-deep weariness had all been for something. It would tell me if I had a future. The fear I felt in the days leading up to it was a physical thing. It was a cold, heavy weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I tried to be brave. I tried to be the stoic, independent Ellie Richardson everyone knew. But at night, alone in the darkness of my bedroom, the fear would consume me. I was terrified. And for this one day, this single, monumentally important day, I did not want to be alone. I needed my children, not their money, not their gift baskets. I needed their presence. I needed to look up from that cold, sterile machine and see the faces of the 2 people I loved most in the world. I knew I could count on Sam. He had already marked the day on his calendar, telling me, "It'll clear my whole schedule, Ellie. Well, face the results together, whatever they may be." The simple, unwavering certainty of his support was a comfort, but it wasn't enough. It was a cruel, unfair thought, but it was the truth. He wasn't my son. He wasn't my daughter. So, I decided to make one last, heartfelt plea. I called a family meeting. I asked them to come to my house for Sunday dinner, something we hadn't done in months. I spent the entire day cooking, summoning a strength I didn't know I had. I made all their childhood favorites, my slow-cooked pot roast, creamy mashed potatoes, and a deep-dish apple pie from scratch. I wanted to remind them of a time when we were a unit, a fortress. I wanted to appeal to the memory of the family we used to be. They arrived, predictably, in a flurry of stress and distraction. Mark was on his phone, closing a deal, until the moment he walked through the door. Sarah was complaining about the traffic and an argument Shed had with her husband, but the smell of the pot roast seemed to work a small magic on them. They settled down, and for a little while, it almost felt like old times. They talked about their lives, their jobs, their children, and I listened, waiting for the right moment. After dinner, as we sat in the living room, a rare, comfortable quiet settled between us. This was my chance. I took a deep breath. "Mark, Sarah," I began, my voice a little unsteady. "There's something I need to ask of you. As you know, my big PET scan is this Thursday. It's a very important day for me, and I'm scared." I admitted it out loud for the first time, the confession hanging in the air, raw and vulnerable. Their faces immediately softened with concern. The distracted broker and the stressed-out mother disappeared, and for a moment, I saw my children again. "Oh, Mom," Sarah said, moving to the ottoman in front of my chair and taking my hands. "Of course you're scared. We're scared too." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "Whatever you need, Mom. We're here, you know that." My heart swelled with a cautious hope. "I know you're both so busy," I continued, my voice gaining a little strength, "and I am so grateful for everything you do. But for this one appointment, this Thursday, I need you, both of you. I need you to be there with me. I need to know that when I come out of that machine, my children will be the first faces I see. It would mean everything to me." The response was immediate and overwhelming. "Of course, Mom," Sarah said, squeezing my hands. "Absolutely, I wouldn't be anywhere else. I'll move heaven and earth. I'll get a babysitter for the whole day. We will be there." "Count me in," Mark added, his voice firm with a conviction I hadn't heard in years. "My schedule is a nightmare, but nothing is more important than this. Nothing. I'll clear the entire day. The Henderson deal can wait. This is about family." They were so sincere, so adamant. They argued over who would drive, who would pack the snacks, who would be in charge of distracting me in the waiting room. They were a team again, my team, united in a common purpose, to support their mother. The relief that washed over me was so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I had been foolish to doubt them. They were good children. They loved me. Of course, they would be there. We spent the rest of the evening planning it out, our voices filled with a renewed sense of warmth and connection. When they left that night, they both hugged me tightly. "We love you, Mom," they whispered. "We'll see you Thursday, bright and early, we promise." I went to bed that night and slept soundly for the first time in months. The fear in my heart had been replaced by a deep, comforting peace. I was not alone. My children had promised. They had sworn they would be there. And as I drifted off to sleep, I held that promise close, a precious, fragile shield against the terrifying uncertainty of the future. The 3 days between that Sunday dinner and my Thursday appointment were filled with a sense of peace I hadn't known since before the diagnosis. The heavy blanket of fear had lifted, replaced by a quiet, hopeful anticipation. My children were back. My team was back. I was no longer a solitary soldier facing a battle alone. I was a general with her most trusted lieutenants by her side. I spent the days resting, hydrating, preparing my body and mind for the ordeal of the PET scan, my spirit buoyed by their promises. They kept up the performance beautifully. Sarah texted me pictures of the new superfood snacks she was buying for our hospital picnic. Mark called to confirm he had cleared his entire day, boasting that he had told his biggest client that family emergencies take precedence over everything. Their words were a soothing balm, reinforcing the beautiful fiction I so desperately wanted to believe. I even called Sam and told him, with a voice full of pride, that my children would be taking me to this appointment. "That's wonderful news, Ellie," he had said, his voice full of genuine happiness for me. "That's just as it should be." Wednesday night, the night before the scan, I laid out my clothes. I packed my small hospital bag. I was nervous, but it was a manageable nervousness, the kind you feel before a big exam when you know you've studied and you have your support system in place. I went to bed early, a rare, genuine smile on my face. My last thought before drifting off was one of profound gratitude for my wonderful, loving children. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. The screen glowed with a name that made me smile. Mark and Sarah, FaceTime. I answered, expecting a final, "Good luck for tomorrow" call. Their faces appeared on my screen, but the image was not what I expected. They were not in their respective homes. They were together. And the background was not a familiar living room. It was bright, chaotic, and filled with the unmistakable hustle and bustle of an airport terminal. And they were smiling, beaming. The kind of wide, carefree smiles you see on vacation postcards. "Surprise!" they shouted in unison, their voices tinny and slightly delayed. Behind them I could see Sarah's 2 children, my grandchildren, waving excitedly, wearing Mickey Mouse ears. I just stared at the screen, my mind unable to process the discordant image. Where are you?" I asked, my voice a small, confused whisper. "We're at JFK," Mark announced, his voice booming with a manufactured excitement. "We're going to Disney World. We found this incredible, last-minute, all-inclusive deal for a week." The kids had been so stressed lately, and Sarah and we just really needed a break. It was too good to pass up. The words hit me, but they didn't register. Disney World. A vacation. My mind was a blank slate, trying to reconcile this image with the promise they had made just 3 days earlier. But, what about tomorrow? I asked, my voice trembling. My scan. You promised. The brilliant smiles on their faces faltered for a moment. A flicker of guilt, of annoyance, passed between them. It was Sarah who answered, her voice taking on the patient, slightly condescending tone one uses with a difficult child. "Oh, Mom, we know," she said, her smile returning, a little more forced this time. "And we feel terrible about the timing, just awful. But this opportunity was a now or never kind of thing. And we knew you'd understand. You're the most understanding mother in the world." I couldn't speak. The lump in my throat was a solid, painful stone. "And you're not alone," Mark added, his enthusiasm ringing completely hollow. "You have Sam. You told us yourself how wonderful he can take you, right? It's all worked out perfectly, you see." He was not just breaking a promise, he was using my own words, my own gratitude for another's kindness, as a weapon to justify his own betrayal. "We're about to board," Sarah said, glancing over her shoulder. "We just wanted to call and wish you the best of luck tomorrow. Well, be thinking of you. Send us a text when you get the results." My grandchildren blew me kisses through the screen. "Bye, Grandma. Send us a postcard," Mark shouted over the boarding announcement. And then, my son, my ambitious, successful son, delivered the final, killing blow. The words that would be etched into my memory forever. "You're strong, Mom," he said, giving me a thumbs up. "You got this. We really, really need this vacation." They needed a vacation. I needed my children, and in the cruel calculus of their lives, their need had won. The call ended. The screen went black, reflecting my own pale, shattered face. I sat there in the silence of my bedroom, the phone still in my hand. The peace I had felt just minutes before was gone, replaced by a cold, desolate emptiness that was more profound than any fear of cancer. The illness was trying to kill my body, but my own children, with their smiling faces and their Mickey Mouse ears, had just murdered my heart. It wasn't just a broken promise. It was a premeditated act of abandonment. They had known, when they booked that flight, that they would be breaking the most important promise they had ever made to me. They had weighed my life or death fear against a week of manufactured fun, and the choice had been easy for them. I was not a priority. I was an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be outsourced to a kind-hearted stranger. The tears I had held back for so long finally came, but they were not tears of fear or self-pity. They were tears of pure, undiluted rage, a rage so cold and so clear it felt like a religious conversion. In that moment, the loving, forgiving mother they had taken for granted died, and in her place, a different woman was born, a woman who had just realized that her children were not the heirs to her love. They were the recipients of a debt they had no intention of ever repaying, and the time to call in that debt had finally arrived. After the call ended, I did not throw the phone. I did not scream. I did not weep for what I had lost. I simply sat on the edge of my bed in the silent, empty house, and I felt a strange and terrible peace descend upon me. It was the peace of finality. The peace that comes when a long, agonizing battle is finally over and you have lost in the most definitive way imaginable. I had lost my children. Not to death, not to distance, but to a profound and incurable sickness of the soul, selfishness. The woman who went to bed that night was not the same one who had woken up that morning. The hopeful, forgiving mother was a ghost, a memory. The woman who woke up on Thursday morning, the morning of the most important medical appointment of her life, was a stranger to me. She was a woman of ice and stone, animated by a single cold purpose. My first call was not to my children to rage at them, it was to Sam. I dialed his number at 7 in the morning, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion that had choked me just hours before. "Sam," I said. "It's Ellie. I'm afraid my children have been unavoidably detained. I was wondering if you were still able to take me to my appointment this morning." There was no judgment in his voice, no "I told you so," just a simple, unwavering kindness. "Of course, Ellie," he said, his warm baritone a stark contrast to the coldness in my own heart. "I'll be there at 9. You just be ready. We'll face this together. We'll face this together." Those simple words, offered so freely by a near stranger, were the words my own flesh and blood could not, or would not, say. Sam arrived, as always, 5 minutes early. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't pry. He must have seen the change in my face, the new, hard set of my jaw, but he said nothing. He simply opened the car door, helped me in, and handed me the familiar plaid thermos. "Fresh ginger tea," was all he said. "Extra honey today." The ride to the hospital was quiet. I stared out the window at the passing world, but I didn't see it. I was seeing my life, my choices, with a brutal, unflinching clarity. I saw the thousands of sacrifices, big and small, that I had made for my children, the missed vacations of my own, the postponed dreams, the endless river of love and support I had poured into their lives. And I saw what it had all amounted to. 2 self-absorbed adults who saw their mother's life-threatening illness as an inconvenient scheduling conflict. The PET scan was as terrifying as I had imagined. Lying in that loud, claustrophobic tube, I felt a loneliness so profound it was almost a physical presence. But this time, it was different. I was not thinking about my children's absence. I was thinking about Sam, sitting in the waiting room with a book and a cup of tea. I was thinking about the simple, profound power of a promise kept. And I was thinking about my will. The will, the document that sat in my lawyer's office, a testament to a family that no longer existed. The document that would reward my children's callous indifference with the entirety of my life savings, the fruits of a lifetime of hard work and careful planning by me and their father. The thought was so absurd, so profoundly unjust, that a small, humorless laugh escaped my lips, lost in the loud, rhythmic clanking of the MRI machine. When it was over, I walked out into the waiting area, feeling drained and fragile, and there he was, Sam. He stood up the moment he saw me, his face a mask of gentle concern. He didn't rush me with questions. He simply handed me my coat and placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Ready to go home, Ellie?" he asked. I looked at this kind, decent man, this stranger who had shown me more loyalty and compassion in 3 months than my own children had in a lifetime. And in that moment, the final decision, which had been forming like a diamond under the immense pressure of my grief and disappointment, became crystal clear. "Actually, Sam," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "there's one more stop I need to make if you don't mind. I need to go to my lawyer's office." He didn't question it. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded. "Of course," he said. "Whatever you need." He led me out of the hospital, his gentle, steadfast presence a shield against the cold, indifferent world. He had no idea that he was about to become the central figure in the final, most important decision of my life. He had no idea that his simple, consistent acts of human kindness were about to be repaid in a way he could never, ever have imagined. The law office of Davies and Finch was a place of quiet, old-world power. The air smelled of aged leather, lemon polish, and the dry, papery scent of a century's worth of secrets. Sam dropped me at the grand stone entrance. "Take your time, Ellie," he said, his eyes full of a gentle, unquestioning support. "I'll be right here when you're done." I watched him pull away, a simple taxi driver who had become the most reliable man in my world, and then I turned and walked into the building, my steps feeling lighter and more purposeful than they had in months. "Mr. Davies," My lawyer for over 30 years was a man who had seen every facet of human nature, from its most noble to its most base. He greeted me not with the pitying look I had grown so used to, but with a sharp, perceptive gaze that saw beyond my illness to the new, steely resolve in my eyes. He had known my husband, he had known my children since they were small. He knew the whole story without my having to say a word. We sat in his large, book-lined office, the city skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Eleanor," he began, his voice a low, compassionate rumble. "I was so sorry to hear about the travel arrangements of your children. I trust your appointment went as well as it could under the circumstances." "It was clarifying, Jonathan," I said, my voice clear and firm, extremely clarifying, "and it is the reason I am here today. I want to make some changes to my will. In fact, I don't want to make changes. I want to tear up the old one and draft an entirely new document." He didn't seem surprised. He simply folded his hands on his large oak desk. "I see," he said. "I am, of course, at your service. Before we begin, I am legally obligated to ask, are you of sound mind and making this decision of your own free will without any undue influence or duress?" It was a standard legal question, but in this context, it felt profound. I looked him straight in the eye. "Jonathan," I said, "my body may be failing me, but my mind has never been clearer in my entire life. And the only duress I am under is the duress of a profound and startling clarity. So, yes, let us begin." For the next hour, I dictated the terms of my new future, my new legacy. My voice was calm, my instructions precise. I moved through my assets with the dispassionate skill of a surgeon. The family home, the place where I had raised my children, the place they had always assumed would be theirs, was to be sold upon my death. My extensive stock portfolio, built over decades of careful saving and investment with my late husband, was to be liquidated. My personal effects, my jewelry, my art, all to be auctioned. The entire sum, every last penny, was to be placed into a single, primary inheritance trust. Jonathan listened, taking meticulous notes, his face impassive. When I had finished outlining the structure, he looked up. "And the beneficiary of this new, consolidated trust?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath. "The sole beneficiary," I said, the words feeling powerful and right, "will be Mr. Samuel Jones." I spelled out his name. I gave Jonathan the address and contact information for the local taxi service where he worked. "He is to inherit everything, unconditionally." Jonathan paused, his pen hovering over the legal pad. "Everything, Eleanor? Your children. You wish to leave them with nothing at all?" This was the moment, the final moral crossroads. A part of me, the mother, the ghost of the woman I used to be, wanted to flinch, to hedge, to leave them some small token. But then I thought of the airport, of their smiling, carefree faces, of the phrase, "We really need this vacation," and the resolve hardened in my heart. "Not nothing," I corrected him. "They have already received their inheritance. For 40 years, they have received a lifetime of my unconditional love, my time, my support, and a significant amount of my financial assistance. Their inheritance has been fully paid out, in advance. What remains is not theirs to claim." I thought for a moment. "However," I added, "I do not wish for my grandchildren to suffer for the sins of their parents. Please add a clause. A separate educational trust is to be established for each of my grandchildren, fully funded through their university education. But the funds are to be managed by an independent trustee, you, Jonathan, and are to be used for tuition and educational expenses only. Their parents, Mark and Sarah, are to have no access to or control over these funds whatsoever." Jonathan nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "A wise and fair provision," he said as he wrote. "And is there anything else? A letter? An explanation to be included with the will?" I thought about writing a long, angry letter, detailing every broken promise, every selfish act. But what was the point? Their actions spoke for themselves. "No," I said finally. "No letter. The will itself is the only explanation necessary. It is my final and most eloquent statement on the matter." He spent the next hour drafting the new document. I sat in the silence of his office, looking out at the city, feeling a profound sense of peace. It was not a vengeful peace, but a sense of order being restored. I was not disinheriting my children out of spite. I was reallocating my legacy to where it was deserved. I was rewarding kindness over blood, loyalty over obligation, the quiet decency of a stranger over the loud entitlement of my own flesh and blood. When the document was ready, I signed it. My signature, which had been weak and trembling just that morning, was now strong and firm. It was the signature of a woman who was, for the first time in a long time, in complete control of her own story. As I left his office, Jonathan walked me to the door. "For what it's worth, Ellie," he said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I think David would have been very, very proud of you today." I walked out into the late afternoon sun, my heart lighter than it had been in months. Sam was there, waiting patiently by his car, a newspaper folded on his lap. He smiled his kind, gentle smile when he saw me. "Everything okay, Ellie?" he asked. I smiled back, a real, genuine smile. "Yes, Sam," I said as he opened the door for me. "For the first time in a long time, everything is perfectly okay." Eleanor Richardson fought her battle with cancer for another 6 months. They were not easy months. There were days of profound sickness and debilitating weakness. But through it all, there was a new, unshakable peace about her. The agonizing turmoil over her children was gone, replaced by a serene, quiet acceptance. She had made her decision, and in doing so, had freed herself from the weight of their expectations. Her constant companion during this time was not her son or her daughter, but Sam Jones. He was more than a driver now. He was her confidant, her friend, her chosen family. He still drove her to her appointments, but he also drove her to the park on good days. He brought her groceries. He would sit with her in her garden, reading the newspaper aloud when her eyes grew too tired. He was a quiet, steady presence, a testament to the profound power of simple human decency. He never asked for anything. He never expected anything. He was simply there. Her children, Mark and Sarah, kept their distance. Their trip to Disney World had created a chasm that they seemed to have no interest in crossing. Their phone calls became less frequent, their excuses more transparent. They were waiting. They were waiting for the inevitable end and for the financial beginning that would follow. Their concern was not for their mother's comfort, but for the status of their inheritance. When Eleanor finally passed away peacefully in her sleep one Tuesday morning, the news was delivered to them by her lawyer, Mr. Davies. Their reactions, as recorded by the stoic lawyer, were telling. There was a perfunctory sadness, the kind one expresses for a distant relative, but underneath it, there was an unmistakable current of relief and a barely concealed buzz of anticipation. The long, inconvenient wait was finally over. They immediately swung into action, but their actions were not those of grieving children. They were those of impatient heirs. Mark's first call was not to a funeral home, but to a real estate appraiser, asking for a preliminary valuation of his mother's house. "Just getting our ducks in a row," he had told his wife, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He was already mentally spending his half of the inheritance on a larger apartment, a newer car, a more impressive life. Sarah's response was, in its own way, just as callous. She immediately began pre-grieving on social media, posting a carefully selected black and white photo of her and her mother from years ago. The caption was a masterpiece of performative sorrow. "Heartbroken to announce the passing of my beloved mother, my rock, my inspiration. The world is a little darker today. Number grief, number loss, number best momever." The post was flooded with sympathetic comments, which she meticulously liked and replied to. Her grief was not a private pain, but a public performance designed to garner social currency. They organized the funeral, but it was a cold, efficient affair, more like a corporate event than a final farewell. They chose the most expensive casket, the grandest floral arrangements, the most sought-after church. It was not a tribute to the simple, warm woman their mother had been. It was a display of their own perceived status. It was a networking event for the soon-to-be wealthy. Sam Jones attended the funeral. He did not sit with the family. He sat alone in the very back pew, a quiet, anonymous old man in a simple, dark suit. He listened to the eulogies delivered by Mark and Sarah, their voices thick with a beautifully feigned sorrow. He watched them accept condolences from the guests, their faces masks of tragic dignity. He saw the entire performance, and his kind, gentle eyes were filled with a profound, unspoken sadness, not just for the woman he had lost, but for the children she had left behind. After the service, Mark and Sarah were buzzing with a barely suppressed energy. "When is the will reading, Mr. Davies?" Mark asked the lawyer, even before the last of the mourners had left the church. "We'd like to get this settled as quickly as possible. We have a lot of financial planning to do." Mr. Davies looked at him, his expression unreadable. "My office. Tuesday afternoon at 2:00, he said, his voice flat. "Attendance is mandatory." The day of the will reading arrived. Mark and Sarah entered the law office with an air of triumphant finality. They had endured the tedious formalities of their mother's illness and death. They had performed their roles as grieving children. Now it was time for their reward. They saw the meeting as a simple transaction, the final transfer of assets they had long considered their own. They sat across from Mr. Davies at the large mahogany table. They were composed, confident, the picture of a respectable family about to inherit a respectable fortune. They exchanged a small, self-satisfied smile. They had no idea they were not at a coronation, they were at an execution, and they were the ones on the chopping block. Mr. Davies cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to echo in the silent, expectant room. He opened the leather-bound folder. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice slow and deliberate, "to read the last will and testament of Eleanor Richardson. This document, executed and notarized on October 14th of last year, supersedes all previous versions." He looked at them, his gaze as sharp and penetrating as a surgeon's scalpel. "Are we ready to begin?" They nodded eagerly, their faces bright with anticipation, completely unaware that their mother, from beyond the grave, was about to give them their final, and most important, life lesson. Mr. Davies put on his reading glasses, a small, deliberate act that seemed to suck all the casual energy out of the room. He looked down at the document in front of him, the last will and testament of Eleanor Richardson, and a profound, heavy silence settled over the boardroom table. Mark and Sarah sat forward in their chairs, their polite masks of grief slipping to reveal the raw, naked anticipation beneath. This was it, the culmination of their long, patient wait. The moment their lives would be upgraded from merely comfortable to spectacularly wealthy. Mr. Davies began to read, his voice a deep, emotionless baritone, the official sound of legal finality. "I, Eleanor Richardson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." He read through the standard legal boilerplate, his voice a steady drone. Mark was tapping his expensive Italian leather shoe on the floor, a quiet, impatient rhythm. Sarah was subtly checking her reflection in the polished surface of the table. "First," Mr. Davies continued, "I direct that all my just debts and funeral expenses be paid. Second, I give and bequeath the sum of $25,000 to the Children's Hospital Pediatric Wing, where I was a nurse for 30 years. Mark and Sarah exchanged a look, a flicker of annoyance. A charitable donation was expected, of course, but $25,000 was a bit steep, a small dent in their inheritance. Still, it was a tolerable expense for maintaining public appearances. Third, Mr. Davies went on, I have established 2 separate, independently managed educational trusts, each funded with the sum of $250,000 for the benefit of my beloved grandchildren, Jason and Emily. These funds are to be used exclusively for tuition, books, and board for their undergraduate and postgraduate education. The trustee, Mr. Jonathan Davies, is instructed to disperse the funds directly to the educational institutions. My children, Mark and Sarah Richardson, are to have no access to or control over these trusts. This time, the look they exchanged was one of genuine shock and outrage. $500,000 locked away where they couldn't touch it. For the grandchildren, that's very generous, Sarah said, her voice tight, the words tasting like poison. She was already seeing the new kitchen renovation she had planned for vanishing in a puff of legal smoke. Mr. Davies ignored her, his eyes still fixed on the document. He took a slow, deliberate breath. Finally, he said, his voice dropping slightly, we come to the residue of my estate. This was the main event. The residue. The house, the stocks, the savings, the millions. Mark stopped tapping his foot. Sarah sat bolt upright. Their greed was a palpable physical presence in the room. All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, Mr. Davies read, his voice clear and unwavering, both real and personal, of whatsoever kind and wheresoever situated, I give, devise, and bequeath, in its entirety, to Mr. Samuel Jones of 124 Willow Creek Lane. The name landed in the silent room with the force of an explosion, but Mark and Sarah didn't react. They just stared, their faces blank. The name meant nothing to them. It was a variable they hadn't accounted for. They looked at each other, then back at the lawyer, their expressions a mixture of confusion and irritation. Excuse me, Mark said, an arrogant, dismissive laugh in his voice. You must have misread that. Who the hell is Samuel Jones? Is he another one of her charity cases? Some mistake has obviously been made. Mr. Davies looked up from the will, his face a mask of cold, professional neutrality. He slowly and deliberately removed his glasses. There is no mistake, Mr. Richardson, he said. Your mother was very specific. As for who Mr. Jones Island, he picked up a second, smaller envelope from the folder. Your mother requested that I read this addendum aloud. Should you ask that specific question? He opened the envelope and read from a single sheet of paper, written in Eleanor's elegant, flowing script. The words that came out were not the dry legalese of the will, but the clear, powerful voice of their mother, speaking to them one last time from beyond the grave. My dearest children, Jonathan read, his voice softening slightly, taking on the cadence of Eleanor's own. If you are asking who Samuel Jones is, it proves that you were never truly listening. Samuel Jones is the man who drove me to my chemotherapy appointments when my own son was too busy closing a deal. He is the man who brought me warm ginger tea when my own daughter was too stressed to answer her phone. He is the man who patiently waited for hours in a cold hospital lobby, simply so I would not have to be alone, while his own children were sending me cheerful postcards from a vacation they chose over my well-being. The color drained from Mark and Sarah's faces. The vague, distant memory of a taxi driver, a problem they had outsourced and forgotten, came crashing into the present with devastating force. Jonathan continued reading Eleanor's letter. My inheritance is not a reward for a biological connection. It is a final thank you for the kindness, loyalty, and compassion shown to me in the darkest and most frightening year of my life. You see, family is not about blood, it is about showing up. Mr. Jones showed up. He earned every single penny of what you believed was yours. Your inheritance was paid out over the course of your entire lives, in the form of my unconditional love and support. I regret to inform you that your account is now closed. The letter concludes, Mr. Davies said, placing the paper down, with this single line, You chose your vacation. I have chosen my family. The taxi driver was my family. The final words fell into the stunning silence. Sarah let out a choked, strangled sob. No, she whispered. No, she wouldn't. It was just a trip. We didn't know. A taxi driver! Mark exploded, shooting to his feet, his face purple with rage. She left millions of dollars to a taxi driver? This is insane. He must have manipulated her. She was sick. She wasn't in her right mind. Well, contest this. We will fight this in court. Mr. Davies remained perfectly calm. He leaned back in his chair. You are, of course, free to do so, he said, his voice as cold as ice. However, you should know that your mother, anticipating such a reaction, had a full psychiatric evaluation 1 week before signing this will, confirming her complete mental competence. She also included a signed affidavit from her oncologist and 3 of her nurses detailing her state of mind. And finally, he said, delivering the final crushing blow, she included a no-contest clause. Any beneficiary who formally challenges this will automatically forfeit any bequest they might have received, including, I might add, the educational trusts for your children. Checkmate. A final, brilliant, and utterly ruthless move from a woman who had thought of everything. They were trapped. To fight would be to bankrupt their own children's future. To accept would be to live with the consequences of their own choices. They had lost. completely and irrevocably. The aftermath of the will reading was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, slow collapse. Faced with the ironclad reality of my will and the potential loss of their own children's future, Mark and Sarah did not contest it. They simply broke. Their rage and disbelief curdled into a bitter, resentful acceptance. The great inheritance they had been banking on their entire lives had vanished, given away to a man they had never even bothered to learn the name of. Their lives, predictably, changed. The easy, casual wealth they had taken for granted was gone. Mark had to sell his oversized apartment in the city. Sarah had to pull her children out of their expensive private schools. They were forced to learn the hard, humbling lessons of budgeting and living within their means. I do not know if they ever learned the more important lessons of empathy and selflessness. I can only hope that, in their new, more modest reality, they found something of value that money could not buy. Perhaps they finally found each other. And what of Samuel Jones, the man who had inherited a fortune for the simple act of being kind? Mr. Davies located him the next day. He was, as always, polishing his old Lincoln Town car, preparing for another day of driving strangers around the city. When the lawyer explained the situation, Sam's first reaction was not joy, but stunned, silent disbelief. He did not celebrate, he did not cheer. He simply sat down on the running board of his car, took off his driver's cap, and quietly wept. They were not tears of happiness for the money he had gained, but tears of sorrow for the friend he had lost. He was a good man, a decent man. A man worthy of the gift my children had so carelessly thrown away. He did not buy a yacht or a mansion. The first thing he did with the money was to buy out the small, struggling taxi company he worked for. He gave all the drivers a raise and invested in a new fleet of comfortable, accessible vehicles. Then he established a new special division of the company, funded by a portion of my estate. It is called the Ellie Ride Fund. It provides free, reliable transportation for cancer patients to and from their chemotherapy appointments. He did not just inherit my money, he inherited my legacy of care. He transformed my final act of gratitude into a perpetual engine of kindness, ensuring that no one else in our city would have to face that lonely journey in a dented yellow cab, or worse, not at all. In the end, my children received exactly what they had given me in my final months: nothing. And Sam Jones received what he had given me: comfort, dignity, and a helping hand when I needed it most. My will was not an act of revenge. It was an act of simple, honest accounting, a final balancing of the ledger of my life. So I leave you with this thought. A legacy is not what you leave for people, it is what you leave inside of them. The kindness of a stranger can build an empire of compassion, while the indifference of one's own blood can leave them with nothing but an empty house and a mountain of regret. Who is your true family? Is it the people you are bound to by birth, or the people who show up for you when the road gets rough? Share your own stories of unexpected kindness in the comments below. For in these stories, we find the true meaning of inheritance.